Arizona Public Media is sponsoring tonight's forum in partnership with the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. And here is the League's president, Judy Moll.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this discussion of important issues in this year's statewide elections. For over 94 years, the League has worked to help people engage in democracy by educating them about issues and campaigns. Tonight's forum is just another example of the League at work. We thank the people at Arizona Public Media and Pima Community College for their partnership in this important effort. I hope you'll watch with interest, learn which candidate shares your views, and then vote. Early ballots are out and the election is just a few weeks away. Your participation in the election process is an important responsibility of being a citizen. Again, thanks for joining us.
And now to the forum. With us this evening are 5 Republican candidates for governor. Ken Bennett, Arizona Secretary of State. Christine Jones, former General Counsel and Executive Vice President of GoDaddy Operating Company. Frank Riggs, a former 3-term congressman from California. Scott Smith, former mayor of Mesa. And Andrew Thomas, former Maricopa County attorney. Doug Ducey, who is state treasurer, declined our invitation to participate tonight. Our forum is structured in 4 parts, and the candidates must stay within the prescribed time for each part. We'll start with an opening statement from each candidate. The candidates had a drawing backstage to determine the order, and Mr. Thomas will go first for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much and good evening. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this debate in this beautiful theater. We face a very important choice this year in this election. And there is one issue that dwarfs all others and must be dealt with honestly. If we do not secure our border and stop illegal immigration before it is too late, this state will go broke. We cannot afford to feed and clothe every person who is coming into our state illegally. We need to be honest about this. We need to get somebody in there who is tough and who will deal realistically and substantively with this issue. As Maricopa County attorney, I ran for that office 10 years ago saying I would stop illegal immigration, and I did just that. Working with the legislature, working with the sheriff there, and with others, we stopped illegal immigration in Maricopa County. Illegal immigrants were leaving the state. If given the opportunity as governor, I'll do it again, this time for good for the whole state. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you to the sponsors of this evening's event. I'm Ken Bennett. I currently serve as the Secretary of State, and I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor because this is an exciting but critical time for Arizona. We can either continue to do the things that we're doing and expect the same results, or we can embrace bold leadership and bold ideas and experienced leadership to move us in a stronger direction. If you remember anything about Ken Bennett tonight, remember 2 words, and that's experience matters. I've served for 30 years in the private sector, ran a family company up in the Prescott area. I was born here in Tucson, but spent most of my life growing up in Prescott, where my mother's family goes way back. But I also have served for 25 years in the public sector, including on the Prescott City Council, State Board of Education, and 8 years in the state legislature, 4 years as Senate President. One of the things a governor needs to be able to do is bring people together, as we did when I was in the Senate, to move Arizona forward. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Ms. Jones, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. I am Christine Jones. I'm a candidate for governor, but I wasn't always a candidate for governor. Once upon a time, I was just a regular citizen sitting in seats like you, listening to other people run for office. And I'm running for governor because as a person who had the great pleasure of helping grow a company from just a few dozen employees to about 4,000 right here in Arizona, I understand the need for us to have leadership who focuses on economic development from a private sector, professional, results-proven way. And as a person who had the great good fortune to grow up in a neighborhood that had an excellent public school system, which helped me become a CPA and a lawyer and work in forensic accounting, I understand the need for every child to have an excellent education. And then as a person now who's traveled more than 40,000 miles to all 15 counties in the state, I know that we need to focus on border security because it is an issue here and the rest of the state, and it's one of the reasons I'm running. So thanks for being here. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Riggs, 2 minutes.
May I just ask a point of clarification, because the previous candidates all got just 1 minute, and I just want to make sure they weren't shortchanged. Is it because I thought it was supposed to be 2 minutes for an opening statement?
Excuse me, 1 minute.
Oh, it is 1 minute? Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Now it's 45 seconds. No.
Please don't count that against me. Good evening, everybody. I'm Frank Riggs from Scottsdale. I'm delighted to be here this evening with my wife, Kathy, of 34 years, native daughter of Arizona, born right here in Tucson when her dad was stationed at Davis-Monthan. I am a former 3-term United States congressman, and I am running for governor because we need a proven, determined leader at the helm. I'm a proud Army veteran, the only military veteran running for governor. I'm a former police officer and deputy sheriff, and I will lead from the front the efforts to secure our border and to combat border-related crime and to fully enforce the law. I'm a former school board president, education nonprofit CEO, and I'll walk my talk when I say that I'll be the education governor, and I'll do that by, on day one, using the executive authority of the governor's office to repeal Arizona's participation in Common Core in order to restore local control and decision-making in K-12 education and protect parental rights and school choice.
Mr. Smith, 1 minute.
Thank you, and what a great privilege it is for me to be here, and thank you to the League for inviting us to be here. It's a lot like coming home. I was born here in Tucson, and spent many, many years of my youth here, where my father was superintendent of Floyd Wells School District, and got the great privilege of growing up in northwest Tucson. As a matter of fact, I would like to say it's a little nostalgic, but as we drove up St. Mary's, my closest brush with death came right up the road here. My father rushed me to St. Mary's Hospital when I was an infant, not knowing that I was lactose intolerant, and I was very blue, and thank heavens the nurses figured out that, or else I wouldn't be here. Maybe that would have been a blessing for you. I'm running for governor because through 30 years of experience in business, and then 6 years as the leader of the 38th largest city in the country, I've learned that conservative principles and governing based on those principles can make a difference. That bringing people together for the greater good and focusing on goals and objectives that build a better community and now a better state are important. That's why I'm running for governor, and I look forward to speaking with you tonight.
Next, the candidates will answer questions submitted by the public and written by Arizona Public Media and the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Each candidate may address up to 4 questions. The candidates knew in advance the question topic, but not the actual questions before now. Our first question is, projections are the state will have an $800 million deficit in 2 years. What specifically will you do to balance the budget? First to answer will be Christine Jones. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, as a CPA, I've actually spent quite a bit of time looking at the state's budget, and $800 million might be a generous way to look at this, particularly depending on some outcomes of some court cases that are pending with respect to past due balances on school funding formulas and that sort of thing. I think what we really have to do, and from a private sector standpoint, this is how I look at this, is focus on both sides of the state's income statement. In the public sector, often we focus singularly on the expense side, but what we would do in the private sector is say, if we have more expenses than we can afford to pay, we need to make more money. We need to sell more product. And one of the things we have to do here is really get serious about setting the stage for private sector job creation. Get the government out of the way of the small businesses, and then get the big businesses to survive and thrive so they can create jobs, because more jobs leads to more taxpayers, which leads to lower taxes, but more revenue, and that's the way to meet those obligations that are looming in the future. And it's a critical, necessary outcome.
Same question, specifically, what will you do to balance the state budget? Mr. Riggs, you have 1 minute.
Well, we do have a projected budget deficit. We also have all the long-term debt that was acquired during the recession. That's why we need a tough, proven, determined leader at the helm, because I'm ready to do the job on day one, and I will make the tough but necessary decisions to fix our state budget and get our economy growing again. What I want to do, because out of this challenge, this crisis, if you will, our own version of a fiscal cliff, we have an opportunity to fundamentally reform our tax code, to simplify it, get rid of all the special interest tax loopholes, all the corporate welfare. We have an opportunity to institute new tax policy in our state that encourages savings and investment and taxes consumption, which empowers the taxpayer in terms of how much they pay in taxes through their consumption decisions. So I want to simplify our tax code. I want to get rid of all the corporate welfare, the crony capitalism. I want to move our state in the direction of a fair, flatter tax code through a broad-based consumption tax, which will generate the revenues that we need for state government to meet its essential responsibilities.
Mr. Smith, you have 1 minute to tell us what specifically you will do to balance the state budget.
Well, this is not a new challenge for me. When I became mayor of Mesa, 3 weeks after I took office, my city manager came in and said, "Got great news for you, Mayor. Revenues have fallen off the cliff. We are now deep in the recession. We're $62 million short." That was a 20% shortfall. $800 million would be less than a 10% shortfall of state revenues, although that's a sizable amount of money. And we'll do what we did then. I can't tell you exactly which program I'd cut now or what we would do, but what we will do is we'll bring people together like we did. We'll decide that we need to change the way we do business. We'll look at every tax and every place that we can to see if the revenue that we're receiving is brought in fairly, and it will create economic development. But the best thing we'll do is we'll restructure. We'll restructure, we'll reform, we'll reorganize. We did this. We cut 10% of our workforce. We laid off over 300 people in one day. That was hard. It was difficult, but it was necessary. And we literally changed the way we did business. And for 6 years, the city of Mesa balanced its budget. And in fact, the last year, we spent less on services in our general fund than we did the year before I became mayor. We can do the same thing at the state level.
Mr. Thomas, 1 minute. What will you do to balance the state budget?
To address a huge problem like that, we need to think big, and we need to tackle major challenges. And I have a couple of areas of interest that I would tackle. First of all, as part of my border security plan, I put forward a plan for welfare reform, which is to require people who are receiving Medicaid and food stamps to put in community service 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. That would help to trim the welfare rolls. The work requirement instituted by Congress 20 years ago cut the welfare rolls in half. That will free up a tremendous amount of savings down the road. In addition, by tackling illegal immigration seriously, we will be dealing with the elephant in the room, and that costs Arizona taxpayers an estimated $2.7 billion a year. So by securing the border, you have a multiplier effect of freeing up that additional income, that additional revenue, rather, that can go to pay down our debt, and that can also go to investing in our future in transportation and in other areas that need our attention.
The next topic, education. Public education is the biggest expense in the state budget, yet we spend less per student than most other states. Should education get more state money? First, we'll go to Mr. Riggs. You have 1 minute.
Well, as I said, I appreciate the question, and I just want to mention that Mr. Thomas talked about welfare reform. I was one of the architects of federal welfare reform when I served in Congress. As I said in my opening comments, I am absolutely opposed to Common Core because it represents the further federalization of K-12 education. That's a fundamental responsibility of state government, and it consumes 40% of our state budget. I want to restore local control and decision-making in K-12 education. I want Arizonans to take responsibility for how we educate our kids. So I want to save the $350 million plus that the Arizona Association of School Business Officials says it will cost to fully implement Common Core. And where I want to focus vital taxpayer resources is on the most difficult to educate segments of the student population. If we're truly serious about closing the achievement gap, raising student academic performance, then we have to focus those resources on students who are low income, have special needs and learning disabilities, have limited English proficiency, and are Native American students. That's how we improve education in Arizona.
Scott Smith, 1 minute, please. Should public education get more state money?
Unfortunately, this is how we start most discussions in Arizona. Do we spend too much or too little? Without talking about the outcomes that we want. The question is, where do we want to end up? Right now, our school system as a whole is mired in the bottom third ranking in the country. The reality is we have pockets of excellence in this state. We have pockets of sheer despair, and we have a whole lot of average in the middle. And the fact is that no two schools are exactly alike. The question is, are we allocating resources, human resources, capital resources, operating resources, to the right places that will raise our system as a whole? We have parts of our population that have unique challenges. These are the places that we need to focus on. We need to focus on third grade reading literacy and apply the resources that every child in this state, regardless of their zip code, can read at grade level. If we'll do that, we will get the biggest bang for our buck. We will get the outcomes we desire, and the question of whether we're spending too much or too little will be a moot point, because we will be achieving the resources that we truly want. That's how we should approach this problem. That's how I will approach it as governor.
Mr. Bennett, should public education get more state money?
Yes, I believe public education in Arizona needs more money, but more important than how much we spend is how we spend it. And I, toured a school here in South Tucson not long ago and talked to a principal who talked about how they improved the education in their school from 20% of the students reading and writing at grade level to almost 75% in just 4 or 5 years. And when I asked him how he did it, they did it, he said, by convincing the students that they were the most important person responsible for their own education. They talked about high expectations in the school and changed the culture. But he said the other thing we did is we got resources into the classroom to our teachers, and they hired teacher assistants. And they improved a school from 20% to 75%. We do need more resources, but we got to make sure that those resources get into the classroom. When I was in the Senate and passed 4 budgets as Senate President, we put more new money into K-12 education in Arizona during those 4 years than any other 4 years in the history of the state.
Ms. Jones, should public education get more state money?
The more or less question, I think, is for tomorrow. Today's question is, how are we spending it? The national average on a per dollar basis is about 62 cents that gets from a dollar of appropriation into the classroom. In Arizona, we're getting about 54 cents into the classroom. So of our $9 billion that we spend every year on education here, we ought to close that gap. If we could just get that 8% pickup, it'd give us about another $700 or $800 million into the classroom. That would be significant. That's more teachers, more dollars per teacher, smaller student-teacher ratios, student aides, curriculum supplies, all of the things that actually teachers need to teach. And then we can say, of this $9 billion on a per-student basis, is that meeting the need? Are the kids meeting the outcome that we are really striving for? If we establish a set of standards in the state and they're applied at a local level and we're measuring against that, then we could say, is the $3 billion that we've taken from education over the last 6 years in need of restoration? And I think that's the way the analysis ought to go on that.
Let's move now to the economy.
Excuse me, if I could have an opportunity to answer the question.
Sure. No, I'm afraid not. We're going to have to move on.
No? Really?
No.
Oh, all right.
Each candidate requested the 4 questions, so
Gotcha.
we're moving
Oh,
on
I
with
understand.
format.
Very good.
Let's move on to the economy. State unemployment remains above the national average, and what growth there has been is largely in low-paying jobs. Does that mean the current state model, derived by Republicans, is not working? How would you change that? A question for Mr. Smith.
Well, I'm not sure that let's focus on the real issue, which is the fact is, no, our economy is not recovered. We've recovered less than half the jobs we lost. And those jobs, as was stated, are primarily low-paying jobs. We've lost a huge opportunity to build our economy, and we are lagging. And especially, this is true here in the Tucson area in southern Arizona, which is lagging behind Maricopa County, and rural Arizona is even lagging further. Yuma, for example, is really struggling as one of the highest unemployment in the country. The reality is that Arizona needs to change its focus. We need to focus on what we do well. I define this by the HEAT initiative: healthcare, education, energy extraction, aerospace, agriculture, tourism, technology. This could be stated as our new 5 C's. And the fact of the matter is that until we start focusing on the things we do well and we elevate our educational system, we will not have the kind of investment and the kind of high-quality job growth that is needed for our children and our grandchildren. That's the reality. That's where we need to focus. We need to have a comprehensive plan, a vision, and a plan to take that forward.
Same question for Mr. Thomas. Is the state's job growth model working? And if not, how would you change it?
Well, you have to judge a model by its fruit, and obviously that's not happening right now, but let's be candid about why. There are a couple of major factors, and the first is illegal immigration. The reality is A lot of jobs that are maybe not the highest paying jobs, but good jobs, are being taken by people who have come to this state and country illegally. And that is a fact, and it's depressing the wages of American workers and of legal immigrants, for that matter. We need to be honest about that. And again, there's a multiplier effect that benefits everybody in this state and this society when we secure the border. A second issue that's important is dealing with our education system. We need to do a better job in high school of having more technical and vocational training so that those who choose not to go to college are able to get paired up with jobs in the local economy. The final thing we need to do is talk about higher education. A majority of college graduates cannot get a full-time job in their area of study, and yet they graduate with almost $30,000 in debt on average. That's wrong, and we need to start talking honestly about it.
Same question for Mr. Bennett.
Well, obviously the model is not working, or we would have recovered more than just barely half of the jobs that we lost during the recession. I think when we talk about economic growth, we have to look at four main areas of focus. One is, what's the cost of doing business in Arizona to make sure that Arizona can attract, but also keep and grow the companies that we want to have here to provide good paying jobs. Two is talent. Our education system has got to be improved so that companies will come to Arizona and or stay here knowing that they can find the workers that will help make their companies successful. Three is our red tape and bureaucracy and all of that. And we need to find every way possible to make it easier to do business in Arizona. And fourth is the image of our state. And that's where a governor needs to show leadership and bring people together to move us forward, to go out and be the salesman for our state and invite companies, corporations, boards of directors to look to and come to Arizona to bring those good paying jobs back here.
Ms. Jones, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I kind of think of this economic development puzzle in concentric circles, and clearly the model could be improved, but if you look at it with sort of honesty and integrity and say, what would the economic model look like if you could craft the perfect model, you'd say the government doesn't create jobs. The government just sets the stage for the private sector. So the first thing to do is for the local companies, all of the thousands of small businesses and entrepreneurs all over the state, who, by the way, are doing the most incredible things. It's amazing what's going on here. Just get the government out of their way, streamline the tax code, remove statutory and regulatory barriers to entry, pave the way for them to create jobs. Because if each one of them just created one job, just one human being were hired, that'd be thousands of jobs. And then go to the next concentric circle, which is the companies outside of Arizona, and say to the CEOs, let me tell you why Arizona is your wisest choice. And to say, like what the analysis that we did at GoDaddy as we were expanding around the country, what is it about this place that's appealing to a company? And then go make the deal and bring those jobs here. More jobs, more taxpayers, lower taxes.
Let's move on to health care. We'll begin with Mr. Riggs. The question is, the number of uninsured Arizonans fell 4 percentage points this year under the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion. Is that a sign of success?
No, it's not, because the Affordable Care Act is not affordable. The simple fact of the matter is, the Heritage Foundation says that Arizona state taxpayers will have to pay $2.8 billion for Medicaid expansion under Obamacare between now and the year 2022. As the cost-sharing arrangement shifts from primarily federal taxpayer funding to primarily state taxpayer funding, although we're all obviously paying both federal and state taxes. It won't work. It's not sustainable. Mr. Thomas mentioned welfare reform. As I mentioned, when I served in Congress, I was one of the architects of welfare reform, and we changed welfare as we knew it by imposing time limits and work requirements on able-bodied welfare recipients. That's now what we need to do here in our state. We need to roll back Medicaid expansion for childless adults who are able-bodied and working age back to 100% of federal poverty. And in the process, we'll protect Medicaid from Obamacare, which raised $1 trillion from Medicare over the next decade.
Same question for Mr. Smith. You have 1 minute.
Well, I think what's been clear is that first the passage, the proposal, and the rollout of Obamacare has been nothing short than a disaster. And I think the costs that'll keep going up will continue to show that it's not the optimal system and that it needs to either be repealed or drastically changed. I did support the governor, though, in the Medicaid restoration for this very simple reason. One of the reasons I do not like Obamacare is it put Arizona in a very tough spot, between a rock and a hard place, between the voter-mandated levels of coverage and the amounts that were required under Obamacare. And I think the governor made a very wise choice that from a purely common sense, mathematical place, Arizona is better off with reformation right now. If it changes in the future, we can change it. But we need to protect our rural hospitals who would be devastated and were being devastated with a lack of funding. We need to protect those 14,000 veterans who lost care and who would not be covered. And I like the fact that my tax dollars, my federal tax dollars, are staying here as opposed to going to California and other states to cover their expenses.
1 minute for Mr. Thomas.
I strongly oppose the expansion of Obamacare and Medicaid in Arizona last year, and in fact, I was the first Republican leader to speak out against it. I helped organize grassroots resistance to it by conservatives and by Republican activists who agreed with me that we should not be expanding Obamacare and expanding the welfare state here in Arizona. Unfortunately, we were not successful, but we do need to go back to before we were when that expansion occurred. But the other thing is, we need to look at the welfare state as a whole. Excuse me, and I have mentioned my plan to institute change to the Medicaid system and indeed the overall approach to welfare here in Arizona is if we have community service requirements, in other words, work requirements, it will affect the welfare rolls. That happened 20 years ago. It will happen here in Arizona. Will free up a tremendous amount of revenue for the state to invest in other areas. I understand the needs of the hospitals and the medical industry and would work with them. We need to get private charitable foundation support for them as well, but we should not be expanding the welfare state. We should be rolling it back.
Same question for Mr. Bennett.
Would you repeat the question? You used a statistic that something had reduced by 4%, if I remember.
Absolutely. The number of uninsured Arizonans fell 4 percentage points this year under the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion. Is that a sign of success?
Well, I don't think so, because the more government involvement we have in healthcare, the more government bureaucracies get in the way of patients and their doctors, and the efficiencies that are usually created when people have more control over their health care. We had 1.3 million Arizonans already on government-provided health care before the Medicaid expansion was done, which I did not support because I don't think it addressed the issues that will be on us in about 3 years when the federal government goes below the 80% threshold. I've proposed a 5-5-5 plan to deal with the number of people who are on access because it's not sustainable in the long term. 5% we need to reduce by growing our economy and getting those enrollees into jobs that can pay for their health care along with them and their employer. 5% by moving them to a pilot program with health savings accounts so that they have some skin in the game. And 5% reduction by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, and by drug testing participants.
Next question, we'll move on to immigration. We'll begin with Mr. Thomas. The question is, what is your definition of a secure border, and please be specific?
Fair question. I think a secure border is one that eliminates 95% of illegal immigration, and that's what I intend to do. I've put forward a plan, a very specific and substantive and realistic plan to secure our border. You can find it at voteandrewthomas.com. It involves putting 3,000 National Guardsmen on the border, building a complete fence. I intend to pay for it with the welfare reform that I have alluded to. You can read more specifics about it on my website. We also need to have judicial reform. Liberal judges have been throwing out all of our immigration laws, the laws that Sheriff Joe Arpaio and I use to prosecute illegal immigrants, the human smuggling law, the day laborer law. Virtually all those tools that we had that were successful in driving down illegal immigration in Maricopa County have been thrown out by our courts. They're perfectly legitimate laws. We need to deal with the judicial activism. But the bottom line is we've got to get somebody tough who is very focused, and if we don't do that very soon, it's going to be too late, and this state is going to go the way of other states where it is already too late and they're on the road to a Detroit-style bankruptcy.
Ms. Jones, what is your definition of a secure border, and please be specific?
I would take a look in a page out of the playbook in the Yuma sector, which is probably the most secure of the 9 border sectors across the 2,000 miles of the southern border with Mexico. They reduced border crossings by about 97% when the National Guard was sent there. So I would use that as a lesson and maybe a benchmark for us. I have called for 1,200 troops on the border in the 262 miles of the Tucson sector plus technology to monitor who's coming and going, and then the fence in strategic areas that are highly trafficked or known smuggling routes. But I also think it's important for us to acknowledge as a state that the federal government is specifically responsible for immigration policy. What that leaves for us to do and what we can do as a state really is to focus on the border. And this has profound implications. This is more than men and women walking across a line on a map. This is about education and the economy and national security and citizenship. It is really critical for us to take leadership on this, even if Congress will not fix immigration policy.
Just a reminder, 1 minute. Mr. Riggs, same question.
Well, I'd like everybody here to know that as a police officer, I pinned on the badge, put on the uniform, literally put myself in harm's way, my life on the line, and have arrested a number of illegal immigrants for committing a wide variety of crimes. As a member of Congress from California, Vice Chairman of the California Republican delegation, I helped get the funding to build the double fence on California's border with Mexico, which extends into the Yuma sector of our border, as you just heard from Mr. Thomas and Ms. Jones, where in fact illegal immigration has been cut substantially, and we need to do the same thing on the Tucson sector of our border. You know, rhetoric is one thing, record and real experience is another thing altogether. That's why I say I'll lead from the front. I'm cognizant, of course, that the governor is the commander-in-chief of the Arizona National Guard. But I want to work on a coordinated, combined federal, state, and local response to securing our border, Tucson sector of the border once and for all, with the appropriate barrier, the manpower, and technology to secure that border, which is a matter of national security, the highest responsibility of the federal government, a matter of public safety and health and safety in Arizona, the highest responsibility of state government.
Okay, just another reminder, 1 minute to answer questions. We'll move on to Mr. Smith. Specifically define what a secure border means to you.
I think secure border means controlling the border. Know who's coming across and who's not coming across. Because I think securing the border includes increasing legal crossings and increasing legal trade. If we will advance the legal trade and take advantage of that as Arizona, especially here in southern Arizona, I think we will have a more secure border. I will do everything within my legal power and the fiscal resources I have available as governor to fight organized crime, to create a controlled border, to work with the federal government, to partner with them in ensuring the public safety of our citizens. As a mayor, I dealt with the impact of illegal immigration and regular immigration every day. Our police force dealt with a society that was living in the shadows, our social agencies. And in the city, I know what the impact it can have, and I will do everything I can as a governor to both increase legal trade and increase the legal crossings of the border so we know who's coming across that border, and also to engage and work hand in hand with the federal government to put all the resources we can to do the same as the state.
The next part of our forum, each candidate has the opportunity to ask one other candidate a question. Candidates must keep their questions to 30 seconds, and the responses must be no longer than 90 seconds. Mr. Bennett, you can go first.
Well, I'll stick right here close with Christine and ask you, you've proposed doing a lot of things to help secure the border and then sending the bill to Washington. I think others have tried that. I'm afraid we'll have another unpaid bill in Washington. Why do you think they'll pay it this time?
Well, I think this is a fair point, Ken, and you and I know that Governor Napolitano tried this when when President Bush was in office, and then Governor Brewer has tried it as well. And I don't mean this to be a political ploy necessarily, but it really is important for us to acknowledge this is a federal government responsibility. If we're going to expect the taxpayers of Arizona to spend $270 million, which is what my plan calls for, to get this border secure so that we understand who's coming and going, we really should require the federal government to return to Arizona citizens that which is rightfully yours. And we'll send the bill to the president and to the administration, and let's understand Congress appropriates funds. So, okay, we all understand how this works. But send the bill, and then keep sending it and sending it and sending it, and be a little tenacious about getting your money back if they don't pay, because we have very little faith and confidence in them focusing on this issue at the moment. What are we to do? There are some legal theories that will allow us to go collect this money on a little bit more tenacious level. But also, importantly, there are other states who have done this in the past. The Texas Attorney General has a really interesting theory about how to collect money for Texas. South Dakota has done this in the past. There are some ways to get this done with strength and conviction of leadership. But even if they don't pay it back, we cannot afford not to do this any longer. We're spending $2.8 billion every single year to educate, incarcerate, and provide medical services to people who are citizens of other countries. Your money needs to be spent in a way that'll keep you safe, secure, and stable.
And Ms. Jones, who is your question for?
Oh, he doesn't get his follow-up? Okay.
No, no. Yeah.
He has rebuttal.
No, no.
No,
I
okay.
don't think there's a rebuttal.
Yeah, no,
Just
according
ask
to
a
the
question.
rules.
Yeah, the
No.
rules.
The rules say there's supposed to be a rebuttal.
Sorry, now I've raised a question.
If he wants it.
You don't want the, okay. I'll
You
just
have
I'll
30
ask
seconds
Frank.
for a rebuttal.
No,
Mr. Bennett?
I thought the rules said that the questioner had a 30-second rebuttal. Did we
Go
miss
ahead,
it?
Mr. Bennett, 30 seconds for a
I
rebuttal.
was not planning.
No?
Well, I'll just say that I've seen it before that, as I said earlier, experience matters, and I don't think you're going to get the federal government to pay a bill, especially if we've gone down there and spent $270 million or whatever the number was proposed by Christine. So I think we've got to be tough on the border, but we got to be smart. And we got to do the things that the state can do. And I believe that the state can play an important role in securing the border. And I've proposed a statewide task force to do just that, but it would focus on the areas of violations of state law so that we could be engaged and incarcerate the people that are breaking our laws.
Okay, Ms. Jones, who is your
Okay.
question for?
Sorry to upset the apple cart there.
Let's just be fair moving forward then. We'll just stay on task.
I'll just go down the line to Congressman Riggs. One of the great privileges of running for governor is you get to travel around and meet so many incredible people. And there are so many incredible people in Arizona, smart and caring and inventive and wonderful people. It's been one of my favorite things about this journey. And I'm just curious, as a relatively newer comer to the state like me, what's been one of your favorite things about running for governor? And and second part of the question, which part of the state have you loved visiting the most? Not that was a setup.
No, not at all, of course. All of it. It's beautiful. I truly have enjoyed campaigning. It's gotten my juices flowing again. I served 3 terms in the United States Congress and then left after 6 years to keep my term limits commitment because I believe elective office should be short-term public service and not a career. And just to be clear, I moved to Arizona with my wife, the native daughter, to take a job offer. And I built from here the largest nonprofit corporation and community development financial institution in the country dedicated to helping public charter schools with their capital and their facility financing and development needs. Arizona Charter Schools that today educate over 5,000 students. I started a statewide online charter school and served as the volunteer board president of that organization for 2 years. It now offers an accredited curriculum and other online educational services to families that need those services for their kids in the home. So I have deep roots here. I guess the other thing that I should mention, I guess, with some deliberation, since I'm in Tucson, is that Kathy and I are the proud parents of 3 Sun Devil kids. Sorry, folks, go Devils. A son and a daughter that we helped put through, through ASU, and our beautiful daughter-in-law, Erin, who just last week gave birth to our 3rd grandchild, Savannah Elizabeth Riggs, who now, like her paternal grandmother, will be a native daughter of Arizona.
Ms. Jones, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just thought we should just softball these questions because, frankly, when you put your face on television, you paint a target on your back and invite people to attack you. So really and by the way, they do attack you. So I just thought I would kind of give us a little bit of a break tonight. And like Frank, it is a beautiful state. So many different types of geography and topography and climate, and I just feel very honored to have the opportunity to represent it.
Mr. Riggs, who is your question for?
Well, I guess I have to ask Ms. Jones a question. I've heard, we've done something like 50 of these side-by-sides. So we've gotten to know each other, I think, pretty well. And Ms. Jones, on many occasions, has touted her background as a CPA, her number-crunching ability, and I say that with due respect. But I've also heard her recently talk about the fact that the men that she's running against have 50 years of experience in government. Now, Ms. Jones's prior experience in government was as a registered federal lobbyist, and my question to her is, why do you use elective office experience as some sort of pejorative, but not talk about your experience as a lobbyist?
Well, actually, registered federal lobbyist is a term of art, and I was not one. But I will say that the 50 years that we crunched the numbers on for the collective of the people running with and against me is indicative of the fact that we have a leadership vacuum. That really is the reason for bringing that up. And by the way, the lobbyist lawyer label that has arisen in the last couple of weeks is kind of funny to me, because I think that there are lots of people in this campaign who've taken money from lobbyists and used it to finance their campaigns, and I'd be interested to see them give it back if they hate lobbyists so much. Nevertheless, I do think it's important to note that we do know each other well. We do, and we've done a lot of these in a lot of different contexts with lots of different audiences, and we appreciate that there are this many people who care about what's going on in this election, because in Arizona, less than 10% of the population is going to pick the next governor. That is not a statistic that we should be particularly proud of. But the reason I bring out the 50 years of collective office experience is because if you have such a great border plan, if you had such a great plan for economic development or education or water management or energy or forest management or any of the other things that have been at issue in this case or in this election, why are we just now hearing about it? With all of that time and all of that opportunity, why just bring it out now? Why haven't you already done it?
Mr. Riggs, would you like to respond?
Well, I would. I mean, I've actually seen the form, so I don't want anybody here to think I'm making some sort of a baseless attack, the form that lists Ms. Jones as a registered federal lobbyist. But that really isn't my point. I don't have anything against lobbyists. That's free speech. That's part of our governmental process. My point simply is we're talking about the highest elective office in our state. We're talking about an office where the candidate who assumes it should be trusted, tested, vetted, and proven. I cast over 3,000 votes as a member of Congress. I'm offering my record of service, my lifetime of leadership experience to my fellow Arizonans, and I'm very proud of my service in elective office.
Mr. Smith, who is your question for?
Well, unfortunately, my question is for the person who's not here, and I wish that Mr. Ducey were here, because we asked him a question last Friday, which we believe he answered untruthfully. When I say we, Ms. Jones and I was looking forward to the follow-up question, and yet he skipped the last two forums, apparently not wanting to answer the follow-up question that we had. So, but in light of that, I will direct my question to Mr. Bennett, and answering things truthfully. Ken, how important is integrity in holding an office and running for office?
Well, I think it's the ultimate character trait that you need, because when you work with other people, you have to build a level of trust. In the 8 years that I served in the state Senate, I worked very hard to build relationships with not only the Republican members of my own caucus, but the Democrats and the House members and the governor. And I feel very good about the fact that during those 8 years, especially during the 4 years as Senate president, you know, a lot of times in the legislature, especially in the Senate, the word is, well, how do you get something passed? It's the three most important numbers in Arizona. How do you get 16 votes in the Senate? How do you get 31 in the House and 1 in the governor? But during my 4 years as Senate president, we built those relationships, and I met every week with the leadership of the Republican caucus and the Democrat caucus. And when we passed the budgets that we passed, we balanced 5 budgets actually in 4 years without accounting tricks and gimmicks. We restored the money to the local cities to maintain their roads. We left $1 billion in the rainy day fund. We cut some taxes, but we also increased the amount of spending in K-12 education. And we did so because we built those relationships and we got things done and brought people together. You cannot bring people together unless they can trust your integrity, that when you say you're going to do something, you do it, and that they can rely on that. And, you know, of the hundreds of legislators I served with, the leader of the Democrat caucus in the Senate the 4 years I was president, Linda Geary, I put her in the top 5 of all legislators I ever served with, because we learned how to work together.
Mr. Smith, would you like to respond?
Thank you, and I thank you, Ken, for going over that, because I think Ken has showed integrity. I think that if candidates are going to put themselves out, and unfortunately we're in a television 30-second ad world, ask why they can't answer questions or why they refuse to put themselves in front of people to answer questions. I think the people on this panel have presented their lives as an open book. And that's what you get when you run for office. And it disappoints me that some will only want one part of the story told and will refuse to discuss the other side of the story. And I think that should matter in running for office.
Mr. Thomas, who would you like to ask a question?
My question is also for Ken Bennett, and it's substantive. It's not hostile, Ken, but you grew up in Prescott.
I did, yes.
And I grew up in rural Missouri. And one thing that I have championed as a cause is I think we need to invest in our rural highways here in Arizona. I think that is something that is important, that has been neglected over the years. I just wondered if you agreed with that, if you had any thoughts, and if you do, what you would suggest to go about tackling that.
Okay. Absolutely. With all due respect, I believe it's time for a governor from rural Arizona because those parts of our state are very important. It's places where we go from the metropolitan areas to recreate and enjoy our time away from work and things like that. When I first served on a city council in Prescott and learned how important the resources that the state is supposed to share per a long-term agreement that was agreed to many decades ago, that they're supposed to share a portion of the state's revenues with the local governments to maintain roads and do things like that. Unfortunately, over the last 5 or 6 years, in order to balance the state's budget, the state has swept, or actually stolen, about $800 million of funding that is supposed to go to the cities and towns and counties. That has got to stop. When I was Senate President, we eliminated those fund sweeps and transfers, and we balanced the state's budget on our own monies, not someone else's. And it was during that time that we created a permanent fund. You mentioned transportation infrastructure. We created a permanent fund of almost $350 million to help accelerate infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure around the state, because it is that important. It's critical to moving around the state. It's critical to our economy, and it's a very important priority that we, I think, proved during my time at the Senate and would continue and reinstate that priority if I get elected governor.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, this is something we agree on. I just thought it was important to raise that. And I mean, the reality is that those of us who live in Phoenix or Tucson, this is, I mean, traffic is not great in either place. It's worse there than here. But we do need to invest in our rural highways, and as I've driven around the state, I've seen that it takes an inordinate amount of time to drive from one community to another. That affects commerce, that affects economic development, and we need to have somebody who, and I didn't grow up in rural Arizona, but I grew up in rural Missouri, where there's quite an extensive network of highways, and I believe that will help us to achieve greater economic growth in our rural parts of the state.
Okay, now it's time for closing statements, and for those, we'll go in the reverse order of opening statements. That means we'll start with Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our ideas with you and our visions. This is an important part of the process. I wish we had an opportunity to do more of this, to talk and to openly discuss the future of Arizona, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Growing up here, being a fourth generation, being married for 36 years, with 3 children and 5 grandchildren. And that's what I think about, my grandchildren. I have a 10-year-old granddaughter, and when I look at her, I wonder, what will happen to her? What kind of state will she grow up in? What are the decisions that I can make as a leader that will impact her? Because that's why this election is so important. We will be making decisions that will literally impact a generation. And this is about leadership. We talked about specific issues, and these issues, I hope, will come and go. I didn't know when I became mayor what the issues would be 4 years down the road. They came, and we took them on. We encountered them. We solved them. We worked with people. But leaders take issues, they take opportunities as they come, and they deal with them. I have a vision for Arizona that hopefully my granddaughter won't have to ask a question about securing the border, because we will have solved that problem, and we'll have order instead of chaos. I have a vision she'll go to schools that are ranked in the top third of our country and not in the bottom third. I have a vision that when she leaves those schools, she'll be ready to learn. She'll be ready to move on with her life, and that she'll be able to raise a family or move on to a career or move on to more education, whatever she chooses, and that she'll live in a place that has an assured water supply, and she's not worried about whether her kids will be able to live here. I have 30 years of business experience and 6 years of experience of leading the 38th largest city in this country, and unlike my colleagues up here who tell you about what they might do, what they will do, I can tell you what I have done. I've been there. I've done it in the worst recession ever. And I ask for your support to carry this to the state level as your governor. VoteScottSmith.com. Thank you very much.
Mr. Riggs.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad we met at a community college because I think now the 13th and 14th years of education are more important than ever, especially for the 70% of our young people who won't complete college but obviously need career training and career-related skills. I'm Frank Riggs, and I'm running for governor for one reason and one reason only. As I mentioned, my last votes as a member of Congress in December of 1998 were on the articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton. My very first votes as a member of Congress were on the first Persian Gulf War resolutions. In between, I cast roughly 3,000 votes. I was a leader and reformer in Congress. I organized the Gang of Seven to expose the House Bank and post office scandals. And the last 16 years, I've been working to expand educational opportunity and parental school choice here in our beautiful state with all its challenges and all its opportunity and across the country, joking all the while that I was a recovering politician. I'm running for governor for one reason and one reason only. I have the deepest, most proven leadership experience. I am the best qualified candidate to take on the tough challenges that we face as a state. I'm ready to lead and to do the job from day one. And at the end of the day, folks, this isn't about my vaulting ambition, my ego. I'm not thinking about to turn 64 years old about a long-term career in politics or the next elective office. I'm only interested in doing the right thing, making the tough but necessary decisions, demonstrating the courage that I think I've demonstrated throughout my life, the moral courage, and yes, the physical courage. As a proud Army veteran, as a former police officer, as I mentioned, a reformer and leader in the United States Congress, as a successful businessman, and as a national advocate for charter schools and school choice. I'm offering my deep background and qualifications to be governor. I hope you'll give me that opportunity and your trust.
Ms. Jones.
Yeah, thanks so much for moderating, and thank you guys for being here. I suppose one of us should acknowledge that the League of Women Voters put this event together, and as the only woman voter on the panel, I guess I'll make that my acknowledgement. So thank you guys very much. I am Christine Jones, and I would love your support. And Congressman Riggs raised a minute ago an issue that I think is critical for your consideration, and that is this. I've never run for office before. I don't owe anybody anything. Probably the single biggest advantage I have and the biggest strength that I bring to this is that fact. I also think it's critical for you to note that there are nice people in this race, and we have gained a level of respect for each other over these many miles and many events that we've done together. But they do have collectively 50 years in office. And even with these men already in place, there's a vacuum. And it needs to be filled by a fearless, determined, proven leader. It's why I'm running for governor. It's why I came out of my private citizen role, just like you, and put that target on my back and have sustained all these lovely attacks. Because at some point, we just have to have leadership that will acknowledge issues for what they are. They are statewide challenges that require cooperation and leadership to solve. That's why I'm running for governor. Christine Jones, I would love your support. I hope you vote for me. And then I hope you go find 2 other people who weren't going to vote and get them to vote for me too. Thanks for having us.
Mr. Bennett.
Thank you for being here this evening, or viewing if that's how you're doing this. I'm Ken Bennett, and I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor to help people. I'm running for governor to help that principal in that school here in Tucson that was able to get their reading and writing levels from 20% at grade level to 75%. And yet now, almost being rewarded with budget cuts. The 22 in-classroom assistants that he had to help accomplish that are being reduced to 4. I'm running for people who are looking for jobs to support their families. I'm running for people like Mrs. Ashcraft, who lost her husband in the Yarnell fire. And she grew up with my daughter. And, you know, the pain that I see on her face. We need to protect our first responders. We need to make sure that they have the resources that they need. I'm very proud to have received the endorsement of 4 statewide law enforcement associations. the Arizona Highway Patrolmen's Association, the correctional officers, almost 15,000 men and women who work in our prison system, the Arizona Conference of Police and Sheriffs, which is about 93 local law enforcement associations, police and sheriff, and then the Fraternal Order of Police. Together, almost 25,000 first responders, men and women who put their lives on the line every day, have endorsed me for governor because they can remember back to a time, both when I was on a city council and when I was president of the Senate, that we took care of the employees that take care of us, and that we kept our word, we built those relationships in integrity. I'm Ken Bennett. I want to serve the people of Arizona. The one word that I equate to leadership more than anything else is service. I want to serve you and make sure that your government is working for your benefit and helping you support your families and them get the education that they need for your children and grandchildren. BennettArizona.com is our website. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, and I do want to thank the League of Women Voters, even though I'm a man. I think thanks is nevertheless in order for hosting a terrific debate in a wonderful location. Arizona is one of the great places on earth in which to live. It truly is. That's why my wife and I moved here 23 years ago, and that's why so many of us live here and we continue to grow. But it will remain that way only if we defend this state from threats, and those threats do in large part emanate from south of the border. We have to be honest about this. We have to deal with it. We have to preserve our sovereignty. We have to preserve our way of life. We have to preserve our jobs and our ability to have the government serve us at a reasonable cost. And that will come only if we secure our border. And that is not just going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen easily. It requires very tough leadership. It requires, and here I speak with some experience and authority, it requires taking on truly the entire political, legal, and media establishment for years to accomplish this. We did this for a period of time in Maricopa County, and I want to see us do that for our state as a whole, but it will take somebody who's very focused and very tough, and that is what I will do as governor. I also believe that the Republican Party should have a conservative, a proven conservative, as its standard bearer in running for governor. I am a conservative. I'm an unapologetic conservative. I've been a professional writer for the last 20 years, and everything I have written for the Wall Street Journal, books that have been main selections of the Conservative Book Club, etc., everything that I've written, what I did in office, and what I would do as governor is completely consistent as those conservative principles are completely consistent. You know what you're going to get. When you elect me, you're going to get a conservative. And we need a conservative, particularly when the overwhelming issue that looms above all is dealing honestly and toughly with an out-of-control border situation. That is what I will do as governor. I'd be honored to receive your vote. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you all for your comments. That concludes the discussion with the Republican candidates for Arizona governor. As a reminder, this forum will broadcast on PBS 6 next Monday evening, also on NPR 89.1. I'd like to thank all of our candidates for taking part. And on behalf of Arizona Public Media and the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you for your participation. Hope you all have a good night.